Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a massive development in Philippine jurisprudence, the Supreme Court's en banc resolution on Senator Ronald De La Rosa's highly publicized petition to halt the enforcement of an ICC warrant. Now, if you're a law student, a bar taker, or a practicing attorney, you already know that provisional remedies can be incredibly tricky to navigate. So we're going to take a very structured approach today to break down exactly how the Supreme Court evaluates a petition for a temporary restraining order, especially when we're dealing with such a high-stakes constitutional scenario. All right, let's look at our agenda for today. We've got 1. The antecedents, 2. Requisites for a TRO, 3. Why the court denied, 4. Limits of due process, 5. Fugitive disentitlement doctrine, and 6. Final verdict and next steps.
Section 1. The antecedents. The emergency petition at the Senate.
To really understand the gravity of this case, we have to look at the exact events that triggered it. The petitioner, Senator De La Rosa, narrated that on May 11th and May 13th of 2026, armed NBI operatives were basically stationed all around the Senate premises. The senator claimed these agents were there to arrest him based on an international criminal court warrant. He argued this was a direct material threat to his constitutional right to liberty and his right to actually do his job as a sitting senator. And that is exactly what prompted him to file this extremely urgent petition for a TRO, or a Status Quo Ante Order.
Which brings us to the million-dollar legal question for our analysis. Does the senator actually qualify for a temporary restraining order under the law? Now, it's really important to note here that to avoid prejudging the main constitutional issues about whether the ICC even has jurisdiction, the Supreme Court specifically limited this resolution purely to the interim relief.
Section 2. Requisites for a TRO. The strict black-letter law.
Okay, bar examinees, listen up, because you definitely need to take note of these 4 sequential elements. The Supreme Court hammered home that for a TRO to issue, you absolutely must have a confluence of these 4 things, and the applicant bears the heavy burden of proving they all exist at the exact same time. A TRO is an extraordinary remedy, right? It's only issued if the matter is so extremely urgent that a grave injustice and irreparable injury will happen unless the court steps in immediately. Now, what's super interesting is how the court approached this. They immediately zeroed in on the very first requirement, the right in esse. Without an actual existing legal right that is clearly established in fact, the entire foundation for an injunctive writ just crumbles. It's like trying to build a house without pouring the concrete first.
Section 3. Why the court denied. Application of law to facts.
So how did the court actually apply that strict rule to these facts? Well, when you weigh the senator's claimed fundamental rights against established jurisprudence, the court's reasoning becomes crystal clear. He argued his right to absolute liberty was imperiled, but the court essentially gave a reality check, noting that the right to liberty is never absolute. Plus, an arrest isn't unlawful if it's made pursuant to a lawful order from a competent court. Ultimately, the right to due process is fundamentally satisfied as long as the proceedings comply with the law of the land. So, following that logic, the court concluded that Senator De La Rosa failed to establish an urgent need to prevent an irreparable injury. Why? Because legally speaking, an injury is only irreparable if there is literally no standard to measure its amount. You can't just claim the mere possibility of damage without actually proving you have a legal right to begin with. It's a domino effect. No established legal right to evade the process means no irreparable injury. And just like that, the petition for interim relief collapsed.
Section 4. Limits of due process. Justice Caguioa's concurring opinion.
Now we get to a truly fascinating part of this explainer, Justice Caguioa's separate opinion. When you read the actual text here, you get this profound legal philosophy regarding who actually gets to benefit from constitutional protections. He stresses that the court shouldn't be rushing to the rescue of someone seeking to evade the consequences of actions that allegedly flouted the rule of law. He wrote this incredibly potent quote, which is honestly a must-remember for any legal practitioner. The court cannot administer justice with one eye closed. Due process cuts both ways. Due process is not a monopoly of the defense. It's a brilliant reminder that the benchmark of due process is making sure all parties get their day in court. He forcefully argues that the senator was invoking due process as if it were his personal shield against cooperation, which is a painfully narrow view that jurisprudence just completely rejects. And he takes it a step further. Justice Caguioa highlights that if the court grants this equitable relief, they can't just ignore the offended parties. The victims of the drug war matter here.
If the court had granted the senator's requested injunction, the victim's participation in the ICC proceedings could be delayed or disrupted, basically affording protection to one person at the expense of so many others.
So the massive takeaway for our legal analysis is this. Due process cannot be weaponized. You cannot use it to prolong the exact injustice that makes international courts necessary in the first place. Due process has to extend to the victims too. It's absolutely not just a get-out-of-jail-free card to avoid legal cooperation.
Section 5. Fugitive disentitlement doctrine. The cost of evading legal process.
All right, law students, you'll want to highlight this doctrine in your notes because it's absolutely critical. The fugitive disentitlement doctrine essentially says you can't have your cake and eat it too. You cannot demand judicial protection from a legal process while you are actively evading that exact same process. The courts are not going to grant affirmative relief to someone who refuses to submit to their jurisdiction.
And looking at the factual arguments presented by the Office of the Solicitor General, this concurrence points out a massive contradiction. The OSG noted that the senator allegedly evaded legal process for 6 months, only surfacing for political convenience. So he's basically hiding from the law while simultaneously knocking on the Supreme Court's door demanding protection. As Justice Caguioa concludes, it is just unfathomable to grant equitable relief to someone who demonstrably heeds the law only when it suits them, but runs from it when accountability calls.
Section 6. Final verdict and next steps. The court's concluding posture. So what's the bottom line? Ultimately, the Banc completely refused to issue this extraordinary remedy in what was a doubtful case. The core message from both the strict procedural denial and that substantive concurring opinion is that an injunction demands immense caution. The court firmly asserted that it must remain where justice refuses to yield. It simply cannot allow itself to be used as a politically convenient doormat or a refuge for impunity.
And that leaves us with a pretty provocative question to think about. Will this strict adherence to the fugitive disentitlement doctrine and this dual nature view of due process reshape how high-profile petitions are handled from here on out? Let us know your thoughts on the court's ruling in the comments below. If you found this explainer helpful for your bar review or your legal practice, please hit the like button and subscribe for more deep dives into Philippine jurisprudence. Keep learning, stay focused, and we'll see you in the next explainer.